You look around and realize something feels off. The room is calm, but your mind isn't. Someone smiles at you, but you wonder what they really meant. A compliment feels like a trap. A silence feels like a setup. You question it. You question them. You question everything. This isn't overthinking. This is your nervous system on fire. And for some people, this is every day. We all have quirks, defense mechanisms, little emotional scars that shape the way we move through the world. But for millions of people, those patterns are more than just habits. They're prisons. These are the minds shaped by chronic fear, by trauma, by neglect. Minds that created strategies to survive and never learned how to let go of them. Welcome to BrainTrap TV, where we don't simplify the mind, we explore it. Deeply, emotionally, cinematically. This isn't a checklist of symptoms. This isn't a surface-level psychology lesson. This is a full-scale journey into the human mind, into the identities we build, the fears we carry, the patterns we mistake for personalities. And today, we walk together through the shadowed halls of personality disorders. Because this isn't just about mental illness. This is about stories. Stories that started long before the diagnosis, before the symptoms. Stories that began in childhood bedrooms, in hospitals, in empty kitchens, in voices raised or never heard at all. Stories where protection became pathology, where survival became identity. But let's start at the beginning. What is a personality disorder? It's not just being difficult. It's not moodiness. It's not a dramatic friend or a controlling ex. A personality disorder is a long-term pattern of thoughts, behaviors, and emotions that differ significantly from cultural expectations and cause distress or problems functioning in relationships, work, and daily life. Think of personality like the filter through which you see and interact with the world. Now imagine that filter is cracked, distorted, not always in obvious ways. Sometimes it's aggression. Sometimes it's detachment. Sometimes it's deep, aching fear of being abandoned. Other times, it's the inability to feel remorse at all. There are 10 officially recognized personality disorders, grouped into 3 clusters. Cluster A, the odd, eccentric ones. Paranoid, schizoid, schizotypal. Cluster B, the dramatic, emotional, and often volatile. Borderline, narcissistic, histrionic, antisocial. Cluster C, the anxious, fearful, avoidant, dependent, obsessive-compulsive. But real life doesn't fit cleanly into categories. Most people don't exist as one textbook definition. They blend, they shift, they change. That's what makes this conversation important. Because personality disorders are not a life sentence, but they can feel like one if they're not understood. They often begin in childhood or adolescence, but go unnoticed until relationships break down, until jobs are lost, until someone starts to wonder, why do I always feel this way? Why does no one stay? Why am I so afraid? Why do I hurt people without meaning to? And most painfully, what's wrong with me? That question, that inner shame, is at the core of many personality disorders. Not because the person is wrong, but because they were never taught how to regulate emotion, how to express need, how to form safe attachments. So they built strategies. A child who was abandoned learns to cling in desperation, or push people away before they can leave. A child raised in chaos becomes rigid, controlling, because that's the only way to feel safe. A child who was never mirrored emotionally stops trying altogether and grows into an adult who doesn't even know what they feel. These strategies get praised or punished by society. The charming narcissist might become a CEO. The avoidant partner might be called independent. The emotionally explosive one gets shamed, diagnosed, or discarded. But underneath every single one is pain. And that's what we're here to explore. Not to excuse toxic behavior, but to understand where it comes from. To bring compassion where there's been judgment. To offer language where there's been confusion. To shine light on patterns people have been living with for years and couldn't name. So if you've ever wondered why you can't hold relationships, why you sabotage happiness, why you feel either too much or nothing at all, this might be your story too. Or maybe it's your partner, your parent, your sibling, your child. This isn't just personal, it's relational. Because personality disorders don't exist in a vacuum. They show up in the way we love, argue, attach, and withdraw. They shape families, friendships, entire lives. And that's why we're taking time, real time, to walk through them. Each disorder, each mindset, each behavior we'll sit with it. Not judge it, not fix it, just understand it. So before we dive deeper into the specific clusters and names, here's the invitation. Suspend your assumptions, open your mind, and above all, listen with your whole heart. Because we are about to enter the minds of the misunderstood, the misdiagnosed, the mistreated, and maybe the mirror. This is not just psychology. This is the soul beneath it. This is BrainTrap TV. Let's begin. Some people walk into a room and immediately scan for exits. Not because they're planning to leave, but because they don't trust they'll be safe staying. Some people don't feel watched. They know they're being watched. Every word, every glance, every silence becomes evidence in a case that only they can see. This is paranoid personality disorder. And it's not about being a little guarded. It's not healthy skepticism or reasonable caution. It's a deep-rooted belief that people are always trying to deceive, harm, or exploit you, even without proof. These individuals live on edge. They interpret compliments as manipulations. They question the motives of friends, co-workers, even family members. Loyalty, to them, is never assumed. It must be constantly proven. And even then, it might never be enough. They're not delusional in the psychotic sense. They don't hear voices or believe in wild conspiracies. Their thoughts are just intensely distrustful. Everything has a hidden meaning. Every action is laced with suspicion. And here's the tragic part. Most people with paranoid personality disorder don't believe they have a problem. They believe you do. You're the liar. You're the manipulator. You're the one who's not telling the full truth. So they build walls. Not just emotional ones, entire fortresses. Around their thoughts, around their hearts, around their lives. Relationships suffer, not because they don't care, but because caring feels dangerous. Vulnerability is not love, it's a threat. And slowly, their world shrinks. Trust disappears, and they end up alone, not by accident, but by design. Not far from that fortress, there's another mind. Quiet, cold, still. This is schizoid personality disorder. And if paranoid personality disorder is constantly engaged, scanning, alert, schizoid is the opposite. Disconnected, flat, detached. People with schizoid traits aren't just introverted. They're emotionally indifferent. Not cold in the angry way, cold in the empty way. They don't crave connection. They don't long for intimacy. They often live their entire lives in a bubble, content, or at least comfortable, with solitude. They may have jobs, families, conversations, but emotionally, they're not in it. They might smile when expected, nod, respond, but behind the eyes, there's distance. They don't get close. They don't fight for relationships. And when people leave, they don't beg them to stay. They're not broken. They're not robotic. They're just tuned out of the emotional frequency most of us live on. And this can make them incredibly hard to reach, especially for partners or friends who crave connection. You try to get in and nothing comes back. Why? Because somewhere along the way, connection stopped feeling necessary, or it was never modeled, or it was only associated with pain. So they chose peace over intimacy, control over chaos, and silence over vulnerability. And in that silence, they disappear from their own lives. Then, there's something else, something harder to pin down. A personality that doesn't just fear connection or reject it, but finds it almost alien. This is schizotypal personality disorder, perhaps one of the most misunderstood of all. It shares some traits with schizophrenia, hence the name, but it's not the same. Schizotypal isn't psychotic. It's eccentric, odd, perceptually warped. People with this disorder often seem off. Their thoughts are unusual. Their beliefs are strange, but not completely delusional. They might believe in supernatural forces. That coincidences are meaningful signs. That people are talking about them indirectly. They might speak in unusual patterns, vague, overly elaborate, metaphor-heavy. But the deeper trait is social anxiety, not just fear of judgment, but a deep discomfort with people. They want connection, but they don't know how to get it. They're anxious, but also indifferent. Awkward, but not self-deprecating. Suspicious, but not paranoid in the traditional sense. They often live isolated lives, struggling with employment, with relationships, with daily functioning. And it's not that they're choosing to be strange. Their minds are wired that way. Their thought process is unique. Their logic follows lines most people don't see. And that can be beautiful and heartbreaking, because they're often mocked, labeled as weird, excluded, misunderstood. And so they retreat, further and further, until the only world that makes sense is the one they've built inside their head. Cluster A personalities are often invisible. They're not explosive, not dramatic, not disruptive. They're just gone, tucked away in their own minds, guarded, distant, strange. And yet, there is always a story behind them. The child who was mocked for being sensitive, the teenager who never fit in, so they gave up trying, the adult who was told over and over, "You're imagining things," until they no longer trusted anyone. These minds are not broken, they're just adapted, shaped by a world that never felt quite right, so they made their own. And that's the tragedy and the power of Cluster A. Because these people feel too unsafe to trust, too distant to attach, too strange to be seen. But every one of them is trying, in their own way, trying to make sense of a world that moves too fast, feels too loud, and never made room for their kind of mind. So if you've known someone like this, or been someone like this, you are not crazy. You are not a burden. You are someone whose brain built armor, not to hurt others, but to protect yourself. And you're not alone in that. This is BrainTrap TV, and we see you. Cluster B isn't quiet. It's fire. It's chaos. It's love, pain, fear, and abandonment all screaming at once. This cluster isn't distant, it's dramatic. Not for attention, but for survival. Let's start with borderline personality disorder, BPD. Imagine feeling like your emotions have no skin. Like every touch is a bruise, every word a wound. You're not just sensitive, you're raw. Always. One moment, someone is your world. The next, they're your enemy. One delayed reply, and your entire sense of self shatters. You're not manipulative. You're terrified. Terrified of being left. Terrified of not being enough. Terrified of feeling too much. But even more terrified of feeling nothing. People with BPD live in extremes. They don't just feel emotions, they drown in them. Joy becomes obsession. Sadness becomes despair. Anger becomes abandonment. And love? Love is both the dream and the trigger. Because every act of intimacy feels like a test. Will they stay this time? And when people leave, because the emotional whiplash becomes too much, it confirms the very fear BPD tried to protect against. That's the cruel loop. Fear of abandonment, intense attachment, emotional instability, actual abandonment, even deeper fear. People with BPD often hate themselves for this cycle. They know it hurts people, but they feel powerless to stop it. Some self-harm, some rage, some dissociate, some beg, some vanish. All are trying to do one thing: feel real again. Now shift the spotlight. Narcissistic personality disorder. Popular culture has turned narcissist into an insult. But in clinical reality, it's more than arrogance. It's a fragile ego hidden behind a mirror made of armor. People with narcissistic personality disorder aren't just self-centered. They're deeply insecure, though they'll never show it. They need to be admired, to be validated, to be right. And when they're not, when someone challenges them, that mask cracks. And behind it isn't confidence, it's fear. They were often raised in environments where worth was based on performance, status, or perfection. So they built a false self, flawless, untouchable, superior. But it's hollow. So they surround themselves with admirers or supply. Not friends, props. Not partners, audiences. They're charming until they're criticized. Then the rage comes, or the stonewalling, or the gaslighting. Because to admit a flaw, to apologize, that would collapse the entire identity. And yet, deep down, they long for love. But love requires vulnerability. And for narcissists, vulnerability feels like death. Now turn to something more colorful, more loud, more dramatic. Histrionic personality disorder. Often misunderstood as just being attention-seeking, histrionic personality disorder is so much deeper. Yes, they crave attention, but not because they're shallow, because that's how they believe they'll be loved. They learned early that emotion equals connection, so they amplify everything. They dress to be noticed. They speak to be admired. They laugh loudly, cry dramatically, tell stories that blur the line between truth and theater. But it's not manipulation, it's desperation. They often don't know who they are when no one's watching. Their emotions are intense, but shallow, not because they're faking, but because they're shifting constantly. They adapt to please. They become what the room wants them to be. And when the spotlight fades, they crash. They may be flirtatious, impulsive, easily influenced, but beneath it all, they're terrified of being invisible. So they perform, because silence, to them, feels like abandonment. And finally, the darkest corner of Cluster B, antisocial personality disorder, ASPD. This isn't shyness. It's not social anxiety. This is the clinical term for what we often call sociopathy. People with ASPD have a long-standing pattern of disregarding others' rights. They lie, manipulate, exploit, and often feel no guilt. They may have a history of criminal behavior, aggression, or reckless disregard for safety of themselves and others. But not all are criminals. Some function well in society. They're often charming, confident, even successful. But their relationships? Transactional. Their empathy? Minimal. Their remorse? Almost non-existent. It's not always evil, but it is cold. ASPD often begins with conduct disorder in childhood, bullying, cruelty to animals, property destruction. And if untreated, it hardens into a personality that sees people as tools, obstacles, or threats. They don't trust. They don't attach. They dominate. But even here, yes, even here, there's a backstory. Many people with ASPD were raised in chaos, abuse, neglect, survival mode. They didn't learn right from wrong. They learned power and punishment. They became the aggressor to avoid being the victim. That doesn't excuse the damage they cause, but it explains the path. Because all Cluster B disorders, though different in form, share one root. Pain, unprocessed, unnamed, unvalidated. They all involve unstable self-image, fear of rejection, difficulty regulating emotions. Some turn it outward, some inward. But none of them woke up and chose to be this way. They were shaped, molded, carved by their stories. And the healing? It starts with honesty, with therapy, with awareness, with radical compassion for others and for ourselves. Because these disorders are real, but so is recovery. This is BrainTrap TV, and we're just getting started. If Cluster B screams, Cluster C whispers. These are the personalities that shrink instead of fight. They don't explode, they withdraw. They don't rage, they ruminate. They don't push others away, they cling. And their suffering? It's quiet, but it's constant. Let's start with avoidant personality disorder. This isn't just being shy. This is social terror wrapped in a smile. This is wanting connection so badly it aches, but being so convinced of your unworthiness that you sabotage it before it starts. People with avoidant personality disorder are hypersensitive to rejection. A single criticism can feel like annihilation, a delayed response, proof you're not wanted. So they avoid intimacy, not because they don't care, but because they care too much. Every invitation feels like a trap. Every compliment feels like a setup. Every relationship feels like a test they're going to fail. And the internal voice? You're not interesting. They're pretending to like you. If they see the real you, they'll leave. So they stay home, decline offers, downplay achievements. And when they do engage socially, it's exhausting because every word is filtered through a fear lens. And when people say, you just need to be more confident, they don't realize confidence is a language avoidance never learned. This isn't introversion. It's internalized self-erasure. And it's heartbreaking because avoidants don't want to be alone. They just don't believe they're allowed to be loved. Now contrast that with someone who fears being alone so deeply, they'll give up everything just to keep you close. That's dependent personality disorder. These individuals don't just dislike being alone. They feel incapable of surviving it. They defer, apologize, surrender their needs. They'll stay in unhealthy relationships, tolerate disrespect, even abandon their own identity, because dependence isn't a preference. It's their lifeline. They've often been raised in environments where autonomy was punished, where love was conditional, where decisions were met with punishment or guilt. So they learned, if you want to be safe, be agreeable, be quiet, be compliant. They become what others want, just to feel needed. But underneath that, there's a storm of fear. What if they leave? What if I mess up? What if I have to be alone with myself? Their relationships feel like lifeboats in an ocean of fear. They cling, not out of manipulation, but out of survival. They're not weak. They're not broken. They're people who were never taught how to stand alone, because no one ever held their hand long enough for them to learn. And then there's the final stop in Cluster C, the one most often misunderstood. Obsessive-compulsive personality disorder, OCPD. This is not OCD. OCD is an anxiety disorder marked by intrusive thoughts and compulsive rituals, washing hands, checking locks, counting. OCPD is different. It's a personality style built around control, perfectionism, and rigid order. People with OCPD believe there's a right way to do everything, and their way is that way. They're often high-functioning, organized, reliable, driven, but underneath that order is a crushing fear of chaos. They feel safest when everything is planned, controlled, perfect. Relationships can feel like battlegrounds of standards. They struggle to delegate, micromanage others, hold rigid moral codes, and often struggle to express warmth, flexibility, or vulnerability. They may have few friends, not because they're cold, but because spontaneity and messiness feel unbearable. Even their own emotions are organized, suppressed, filed away for later. They don't feel, they manage feelings. But that emotional constipation, it builds until they feel paralyzed, stuck in a world of their own rules. Their need for order isolates them. Their perfectionism strangles them. Their sense of duty drains them. And often, they don't see it as a disorder. They think it's just being responsible. But it's more than that. It's a defense, a way to feel safe in a world that once made them feel powerless. Cluster C is rarely loud. It doesn't demand your attention. It suffers quietly. But make no mistake, it suffers deeply. These individuals often go undiagnosed because their pain looks like being nice, being responsible, or just being anxious. But beneath those polite smiles is a mind begging for relief. From guilt, from fear, from the belief that they're only lovable if they're perfect or invisible. So how do you help someone with cluster C traits? You don't push. You don't fix. You invite. You offer safety. You model compassion. You remind them they don't have to earn love by shrinking or performing. You remind them that softness isn't weakness, that silence doesn't have to be shame, that it's okay to take up space. These disorders aren't flaws. They're adaptations. Brilliant, painful, beautiful adaptations that once kept someone safe. But now they keep them small. And maybe it's time to outgrow them. There are wounds that don't bleed. They linger in the background, quiet, corrosive, invisible. And they shape a life not through chaos, but through quiet self-destruction. This is the shadow world of personality disorders that often go unnoticed. Not because they aren't real, but because the pain is hidden beneath layers of compliance, sadness, and self-sabotage. Let's start with the one that smiles, but resents. Passive-aggressive personality disorder. It's a psychological masquerade, a life where anger is forbidden, but still finds a way out. People with this pattern don't scream, they sigh. They don't confront, they delay. They say sure, no problem, but inside, they're boiling. Maybe they grew up in a home where expressing anger wasn't safe. Maybe they were punished for speaking up, so now they fight back the only way they know how, by not fighting at all. Instead, they procrastinate. They forget. They subtly resist. Not because they want to be difficult, but because they've never been taught how to say, asterisk, I'm hurt. Asterisk, passive-aggressive behavior isn't laziness. It's rebellion disguised as obedience. And deep down, there's pain. Because they don't want to disappoint people. They just don't know how to protect themselves without pushing others away. Then there's the constant cloud, the weight that never lifts. Depressive personality disorder isn't just sadness. It's a deep-rooted belief that life itself is joyless, pointless, unchanging. These aren't people going through a bad week. These are people who carry a narrative etched into their minds that says, asterisk, happiness isn't for me. Asterisk, they blame themselves for everything, even when it's not their fault. They anticipate failure, expect disappointment, and find it hard to accept compliments. Why? Because joy feels like a lie. And sadness? Well, sadness feels familiar. Safe, even. It's not that they want to be miserable. It's that the idea of hope has let them down so many times, they stop believing in it. They may smile. They may function. But inside, it's like moving through molasses. Every day, and perhaps the most tragic of all, is a disorder built around one devastating idea. I deserve to suffer. Self-defeating personality disorder. Some call it masochistic. But it's not about enjoying pain, it's about expecting it. These are the people who sabotage their own happiness, who push away love when it gets too close, who find a way to fail even when success is within reach. They've been conditioned to believe that suffering is the price of existence. Maybe they grew up in environments where love was conditional, where being happy felt dangerous, where getting attention meant something bad was going to happen. So now, they find comfort in chaos. They trust pain more than peace. They choose the wrong partners. They give up on themselves right before a breakthrough. And when life finally offers them something good, they find a way to ruin it. Because deep down, they believe that's what they deserve. But here's the truth. These disorders, they don't make someone hopeless. They make them human. Human in a world that never taught them how to handle their own emotions with grace. Passive-aggressive, depressive, self-defeating. These aren't labels. They're survival strategies that once protected someone and now imprison them. So if you've ever delayed a task out of spite or smiled while secretly fuming, if you've ever looked in the mirror and thought, "I'll never be good enough," if you've ever destroyed something good because you were terrified it wouldn't last, then you've touched this pain. You've lived its echo. But healing is possible, because what was learned can be unlearned. The lies we tell ourselves, they can be rewritten. The patterns we repeat, they can be broken. It takes courage. It takes help. It takes a willingness to believe, sometimes blindly, that maybe you do deserve love. That maybe happiness isn't a setup. That maybe, just maybe, you are enough, exactly as you are. Because you were never meant to live in the background of your own life. You were never meant to be the villain in your own story. And your pain, however invisible it may seem, still matters. Treatment. It's not a magic word. It's not a switch you flip. It's a decision, a journey, a long road paved with setbacks, breakthroughs, and the quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, life doesn't always have to feel this hard. For those living with personality disorders, treatment isn't just about getting better. It's about surviving. About learning how to live with the parts of yourself you were told were too much or not enough. And it starts with the most powerful medicine we have, therapy. Therapy is not just a room with a couch. It's not a stranger scribbling on a notepad. It's a lifeline, a mirror, a battlefield. And for many, it's the first time someone actually listens, really listens. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, teaches the brain to challenge its own lies. The ones that whisper, "You're worthless, you'll fail," asterisk, "You're unlovable." Asterisk CBT doesn't just offer hope, it offers tools. You learn to dissect your thoughts, question them, replace them. Slowly, with practice, you start to shift the internal narrative that's been running your life on autopilot. But CBT isn't alone. Dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT, is another warrior in the therapeutic world. Originally designed for borderline personality disorder, it's a lifeline for emotional chaos. It teaches distress tolerance, emotional regulation, mindfulness, interpersonal effectiveness. In simpler terms, it teaches people how to survive their own feelings without burning everything to the ground. Psychodynamic therapy, meanwhile, takes you deep, into the past, into the wounds that never healed. It connects the dots between childhood pain and adult patterns. It's less about tools and more about insight, about understanding why you are the way you are. And sometimes, understanding is the first step toward forgiveness, especially the kind you owe yourself. Schema therapy? That one unearths the core beliefs we carry, our personal myths. Asterisk, "I must be perfect to be loved. Everyone will leave me. I'm a failure." Asterisk, and once you recognize the script, you can begin to rewrite it. But therapy, any therapy, isn't easy. It's confronting. It can feel like emotional surgery without anesthesia. You will cry. You will resist. You will think it's not working. And then, one day, you'll realize you reacted differently. You'll notice the voice in your head isn't quite as cruel. You'll look back and see the progress you didn't even know you were making. Sometimes, therapy needs a partner. That's where medication comes in. Not as a cure, but as support, a bridge. For those whose emotions feel like tidal waves, antidepressants and mood stabilizers can provide enough stillness to even begin the work. Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs, like fluoxetine or sertraline, can lift the crushing weight of depression. They don't change who you are, but they make it easier to get out of bed, to think clearly, to engage with life instead of running from it. In some cases, anti-anxiety medications or atypical antipsychotics might be introduced, not because the person is crazy, but because their inner world is too loud, too chaotic, and they need space. Medication doesn't fix trauma. It doesn't erase personality. What it does, when used responsibly, is create enough balance to make healing possible. But there's something else, something just as critical: coping. Coping strategies are the unsung heroes of recovery. They're the things we do in between therapy sessions, on the bad days, in the quiet hours when no one is watching. One of the most powerful tools? Journaling. Not just the Dear Diary kind, but structured emotional release. Writing down the thought, dissecting it, naming the feeling, challenging the belief behind it. It's mindfulness with a pen. Mindfulness itself is revolutionary. Not in a woo-woo way, but in a training your brain to be present way. For someone with a personality disorder, the mind is often a haunted house, stuck in the past, terrified of the future. But mindfulness, it says, asterisk, be here. Just for now. Asterisk, breathe. Observe. Detach. Movement is medicine too. Exercise doesn't just change your body, it alters your brain chemistry. Endorphins fight depression. Routine builds discipline. And feeling strong physically? It can bleed into emotional resilience. Setting boundaries is another survival skill. For the dependent personality, that means learning to say no. For the avoidant, that means daring to say yes. For the obsessive-compulsive, that means letting go, even if it's imperfect. And for every one of them, it means reclaiming the right to be human, not perfect. Connection matters more than we admit. Support groups, peer networks, online communities, sometimes hearing "me too" is the most healing phrase in the world. Because isolation is a liar. It convinces us we're the only ones. But we're not. Recovery is not linear. You will fall. You will relapse. You will doubt yourself. But every step backward is part of the dance. And sometimes, you fall to learn how to rise. Here's the hardest truth of all. No one can heal you but you. But here's the hope that comes with it. No one can stop you, either. Healing doesn't mean the disorder disappears. It means you stop letting it define you. It means you can have a bad day without letting it become your identity. It means you can build a life that isn't ruled by fear, shame, or self-doubt. It means you become your own safe place. So whether you're the one hurting or the one who loves someone who is, please don't give up. There's help, there's hope, and there's healing. Not the movie kind, not the miracle kind, but the real kind, the hard kind, the kind that sticks. Because no matter where you're starting from, the journey forward is still a journey forward.